Welcome to Audible Archives. I'm Rob, your host and narrator, and tonight's tale has been sharply rewritten by Raul. In Motive versus Opportunity, a seemingly simple legal puzzle turns into a brilliantly twisted mystery. A vanished will, a dying man's final signature, and suspects with perfect motives but impossible opportunities settle in as Miss Marple cuts through confusion with one of her most elegant deductions. Mr. Petherick cleared his throat, an action he always performed with a little more ceremony when he felt the importance of his subject. "I'm afraid," he began, glancing around with mild apology, "that my little problem will seem rather tame after the sensational tales we've just heard. No bloodshed, no violence, but it is a curious and ingenious puzzle. And for once, I happen to know the correct answer. It isn't terribly legal, is it?" asked Joyce Lempriere anxiously. "Not full of technical points and heaps of Barnaby versus Skinner, 1881. Petherick's thin face softened into a grandfatherly smile. "No, my dear young lady. No such terrors. The story is perfectly straightforward. Any layman can follow it. No legal quibbles," Miss Marple warned, waving a knitting needle at him. "Certainly not," said Petherick, but Sir Henry looked doubtful. "Well," he said, "we shall see." Mr. Petherick folded his hands and leaned forward. "It concerns a former client of mine, whom we shall call Mr. Simon Clode, a wealthy man, immensely wealthy. He lived in a large house not far from here. He had one son, killed in the war, leaving behind a single child, a little girl named Cristobel. Her mother had died giving birth to her, and after her father's death, she came to live with her grandfather. And, ladies and gentlemen, I have never seen a man so passionately devoted to a child. Little Chris ruled him completely. His whole world revolved around her. And then, when she was only 11, she caught pneumonia and died." A small murmur went around the group. "Poor Mr. Clode was inconsolable," Petherick continued, "absolutely broken. Around the same time, his brother died in very reduced circumstances, and Mr. Clode, being generous by nature, took in a brother's 3 neglected children, Grace, Mary, and George. But he never gave him the love he had given Cristobel. To them he was kind, fair, dutiful, but never warm." Petherick adjusted his eyeglasses. "George found employment in a nearby bank. Grace married a promising young research chemist, Philip Garrard. Mary, quiet, dutiful Mary, remained at home and ran the household. I always believed she felt real fondness for her uncle, though she never showed it demonstratively. Well, matters went on quietly. Shortly after Cristobel's death, Mr. Clode came to me to draw up a new will. His entire fortune divided equally among the 3 nephews and nieces, a third each. Quite tidy." He paused and continued. "Sometime after that, I met George in the town. Naturally, I inquired about his uncle. To my surprise, George looked distressed. 'I wish you could talk sense into Uncle Simon,' George burst out. 'This spirit business is getting worse and worse.' 'What spirit business?' I asked, and then George told me." Mr. Petherick's voice lowered conspiratorially. Over the months, Mr. Clode had developed an absorbing interest in spiritualism. And then, worse, he met an American medium calling herself Mrs. Eurydice Spragg. Joyce snorted. "What a name!" "Quite," Petherick agreed. "And from George's description, she was nothing short of a charlatan. She all but lived in house. Seances were held at every opportunity. And at these seances, the spirit of little Cristobel manifested, usually with sentimental messages from beyond. To Mr. Clode, who adored his grandchild and longed for any contact with her, this woman became indispensable." Petherick raised a cautionary finger. "Now, I am not one of those who dismiss spiritualism with laughter and contempt. I am a believer in evidence. And there is evidence, solid evidence, that cannot be explained away. But spiritualism does lend itself to fraud. And everything George told me convinced me that Mrs. Eurydice Spragg was a dangerous impostor, and that poor Simon Clode was completely in her power. The old man, continued Mr. Petherick, steepling his fingers, though shrewd enough in business, was utterly helpless where his dead granddaughter was concerned. In that direction he could be imposed upon with humiliating ease. He sighed. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. I was fond of the young Clodes, Mary and George, and I feared greatly that this Mrs. Spragg's growing influence over their uncle could lead to serious trouble. Petherick leaned forward. At the earliest opportunity, I paid a visit to Simon Clode on a purely manufactured pretext. I found Mrs. Spragg enthroned in the household, an honored guest. The moment my eyes fell upon her, every one of my worst fears snapped into place. His tone became dry. She was a stout, middle-aged woman, dressed flamboyantly in colors no Christian I should be asked to endure before tea. She overflowed with sanctimonious phrases about our dear ones were passed over, and all the usual cant of her profession. Her husband, Absalom Spragg, was also in residence, a forlorn, thin fellow with mournful eyes that shifted about like a ferret's, a very unsavory pair. Petherick paused before going on. I managed to get Mr. Clode alone and gently approached the subject. He was utterly transported. Mrs. Eurydice Spragg, according to him, was nothing short of an angel sent from heaven in answer to prayer. She cared nothing for money. Helping the bereaved was her sacred mission. She had the feelings of a mother toward dear departed Chris. He was beginning to think of her almost as a daughter. A faint murmur of disapproval ran through the room. And then, Petherick went on, he told me of the seances, how he had heard Chris's voice, her very voice, saying she was well and happy with her father and mother, and how she had expressed tender sentiments regarding the Spraggs, statements which, I may say, were diametrically opposed to the actual character and speech of the child as I had known her. Petherick's voice cooled. Eventually he broke off and accused me, good-humoredly, of being scoffer. He turned up his palms. Not at all, I told him. I am no scoffer. I believe in evidence. Many men of unquestioned honor have vouched for genuine phenomena. But surely Mrs. Spragg herself comes to you with strong recommendations. He shook his head. That did it. He launched into raptures. Her meeting him had been divinely ordained. A mere coincidence, but oh, what blessed one. Petherick sighed again. I left the house thoroughly dissatisfied. Every instinct told me the situation was dangerous, yet I could see no remedy. After much thought, I finally wrote to Philip Garrard, Grace's husband, laying out the matter delicately. I suggested that Mr. Clode be encouraged toward reputable spiritualist circles, where genuine investigators might counterbalance Mrs. Spragg's influence. He folded his hands. Garrard responded at once. Being more aware than I of Mr. Clode's precarious health, he was determined not to let his wife and her siblings lose their rightful inheritance to this predatory medium. He arrived the very next week, bringing with him no less a figure than Professor Longman, the greatest scientific authority in England to take spiritualism seriously, a man of unimpeachable character and integrity. And what happened? Asked Joyce. The result, Petherick said gravely, was disastrous. He leaned back in his chair. Professor Longman said almost nothing during his visit. 2 seances were held. Under what conditions, I cannot say. He maintained a neutral attitude throughout, but after returning home, he wrote to Garrard privately. In this letter he stated that while he could detect no definite fraud, the phenomena lacked authenticity, and he believed Mrs. Spragg's manifestations were not genuine. He authorized Garrard to show the letter to Mr. Clode, which Garrard did. Petherick tightened his lips, and Mr. Clode flew into a towering rage. "It was all a plot," Mr. Petherick said, his voice tightening. "A wicked, clumsy plot to discredit Mrs. Spragg." So Clode insisted, furiously. According to him, she was a saint, misunderstood and persecuted. She had already warned him, he said, that jealous enemies in England would try to ruin her. He shook his head slowly. He reminded Philip that Professor Longman had not detected any fraud, and he swore that Eurydice Spragg had come to him in the darkest hour of his life, had lifted him from despair, had given him hope. He declared he would stand by her, even if it meant severing ties with every member of his own family. "She is more to me than anyone in this world," he said. Petherick sighed. Philip Garrard was turned out of the house with very little ceremony, and afterward, well, the old man's rage cost him dearly. His health, already failing, took a sharp turn for the worse. For the next month he rarely left his bed. The doctors feared he might remain bedridden until death released him. He paused, remembering. And then, 2 days after Philip's dismissal, I received an urgent summons. When I arrived, I found Simon Clode propped on pillows, gray-faced and struggling for breath. To my untrained eye, he looked desperately ill. Petherick imitated the old man's rasping voice. "This is the end of me. I feel it. Don't argue, Petherick. Before I die, I must do my duty to the one soul who has done more for me than anyone in this world. I am but to make a new will." I tried to suggest drafting something for him, or sending a formal document later, but he refused. Again Petherick mimicked the gasping whisper. "Later won't do. I may not live through the night. I've written down what I want. Here, tell me if it's correct." He pulled a sheet of paper from beneath his pillow. A few sentences, scribbled in pencil. Very simple. He left £5,000 each to his nieces and nephew, and the entire remainder of his immense fortune to Eurydice Spragg. In gratitude and admiration. Petherick frowned. I disliked extremely, but the man was fully sane. There was nothing I could do. He continued. He rang the bell. 2 servants appeared. Emma Gaunt, the long-serving housemaid, a tall, austere woman in her middle years who would care for him faithfully, and the cook, a young, cheerful woman of about 30. Clode glared at them from beneath his heavy eyebrows. Petherick deepened his voice again. "You too will witness my will. Emma, fetch my fountain pen." Emma crossed to the desk immediately. She opened one drawer. "Not that one, girl," Clode snapped. "It's in the right-hand drawer. Haven't you learned anything in all these years?" "No, sir, it's here," Emma said quietly, lifting the pen from the left drawer. Clode snorted. "Then you must have put away wrong. I cannot endure disorder. Everything should be kept in its proper place." Petherick tapped the table lightly. "A small thing, perhaps, but small things matter, especially in household where routine is ritual." Still muttering complaints under his breath, Mr. Petherick continued. Simon Clode took the pen from Emma Gaunt and began copying his hastily scribbled draft, now properly amended by me, onto a clean sheet of paper. The writing shook, but the signature was steady enough. He tapped the table lightly with a forefinger. When he finished, Emma Gaunt and the cook, Lucy David, stepped forward in turn and signed their names as witnesses. I folded the will, slid it into a long blue envelope. Ordinary stationery only, as there had been no time for anything more formal. Petherick's tone shifted, taking on the weight of memory. The servants were just turned to leave when Clode suddenly sagged back onto his pillows. His face twisted. He seemed on the verge of another seizure. I bent over him in alarm, and Emma ran back to bedside. After a moment, thankfully, the attack passed. He mimicked the old man's faint smile. "It's all right, Petherick. Don't fuss. At least I can die easy now. I've done what I meant to do." Emma looked at me for permission to leave. I nodded. On her way out, she stooped to pick up the blue envelope I had dropped in my panic and handed it back to me. I put it securely in my coat pocket. Petherick sighed. "You're annoyed, Petherick," Clode said. "You're prejudiced like the rest of them." "It isn't prejudice," I told him. "Mrs. Spragg may be exactly what she claims, but leaving her a little something as a token of gratitude is one thing. Disinheriting your own family for a stranger is quite another." And with that, I left the room. I could do no more. He shifted his spectacles. As I came down the hall, Mary Clode stepped out of the drawing room. "You'll stay for tea, won't you?" she said. Before I could refuse, she guided me into a warm room glowing with firelight. He smiled faintly at the memory. George came in shortly afterward. Mary handed him my overcoat, and he placed it across a chair at the far end of the room. Then the three of us sat by the fire and drank tea. Petherick leaned back. We discussed a small matter concerning the estate, something Simon Clode had refused to attend to and had delegated to George. The boy wasn't confident in his judgment. At my suggestion, we moved to the study so I could look over papers. Mary accompanied us. He paused, letting the atmosphere settle. About 15 minutes later, I rose to leave. I remember my overcoat, went back to the drawing room, and found Mrs. Eurydice Spragg kneeling beside the chair where George had laid it. She was tugging fussily at the cretonne slipcover as though adjusting it, though nothing seemed out of place. Her face was quite red when she stood. "That cover never sits right," she said. "I could make a better one myself." I took my overcoat. As I lifted it, I saw that the blue envelope had fallen from the pocket onto the floor. I picked it up, slipped it safely inside again, said my goodbyes, and left. Now his voice grew measured, deliberate. What I did next must be described precisely. When I reached my office, I removed my overcoat and took out the envelope with the will inside. I had it in my hand, standing by my desk when my clerk entered. Someone wished to speak to me on the telephone, and the extension on my desk was out of order, so I went with him to the outer office. I was away for about 5 minutes. He folded his hands. When I returned, my clerk was waiting. "Mr. Spragg is here to see you, sir," he said. I showed him into your office. There he was, Absalom Spragg, sitting comfortably beside my desk. Petherick's lips tightened. He got up, greeted me with that oily politeness it is, and then launched into a long, rambling speech. It was part apology, part self-justification. He was worried people were saying things about him, about his wife. He assured me she had been a pure-hearted soul from her infancy. Her motives, he said, were stainless, her devotion sacred. Petherick lifted his eyes with dry humor. And all the while he talked, I wondered why he'd come to see me at that exact moment, and why, though I could not yet prove it, I had the uneasy feeling that something was terribly wrong. "I'm afraid I was rather short with him," Mr. Petherick continued, a hint of embarrassment tightening the corners of his mouth. "In fact, I believe Mr. Spragg eventually realized his little performance wasn't having its intended effect, and he left, decidedly quicker than he'd arrived." He lifted a hand, recalling the moment. It was only then that I remembered the will. It was still lying on the table, exactly where I'd left it before the telephone call. I sealed the envelope, wrote the necessary inscription on the outside, and placed it securely in my safe. He paused. "And now," he said quietly, "we come to the heart of the mystery." Everyone leaned forward. 2 months later, Simon Clode died. I won't burden you with the dreary details of probate procedure. I'll give you the facts directly. The sealed envelope was removed from my safe, untouched since the day I placed it there. When it was opened, he lifted his brows. It contained nothing but a blank sheet of paper. A soft gasp ran around the circle. Petherick smiled, dry, almost pleased. "You see the issue, I'm sure?" "For 2 months. The envelope sat in my safe, on a lock and key. No interference possible. So the tampering must have happened in the very short window between the signing of the will and the moment I placed it in the safe." He steepled his fingers. "Who had opportunity and who had motive?" He gave him the summary with a lawyer's clarity. "Clode signed the will. I placed it in an envelope and tucked it into my overcoat pocket. The coat was taken by Mary, handed to George, both in full view. The only one who had private access to that coat was Mrs. Eurydice Spragg, while I was in the study. The fact that I later saw the envelope lying on the floor instead of inside the pocket strongly suggested she had removed it." He leaned forward slightly. "She had opportunity, but no motive that will benefited her. To replace it with a blank paper would ruin her entire scheme." He tapped the arm of his chair. "The same applies to her husband. Spragg had a moment alone in my office before I returned. He could have switched the papers. But, again, no motive. Destroying would destroy the fortune intended for him and his wife." He spread his hands. "On the other hand, 2 people had motive, George and Mary Clode. By destroying the will, the old gentleman's fortune reverted to the earlier arrangement, leaving the entire estate split neatly between the 3 young relatives. But neither of them ever had a moment alone with that envelope." He lifted one eyebrow. "I will add a third possibility. The housemaid, Emma Gaunt, fiercely loyal to her young charges, violently hostile to Spragg's, and, how shall I put it, a woman who might very well attempt such a bold action if it occurred to her. But she had no opportunity to tamper with the contents. She held the envelope only once, briefly, and she certainly had no duplicate envelope. The blue one was my own, brought from my office." He sat back and let the silence breathe. "And so, ladies and gentlemen, that is my little puzzle. Clearly stated, I trust. I shall be most interested to hear your theories." To everyone's astonishment, Miss Marple suddenly allowed a merry, bubbling chuckle, quite involuntary and wholly delighted. Something in the story had tickled her profoundly. Raymond blinked. "Aunt Jane, what's the joke? Don't keep it to yourself." Miss Marple, still smiling, folded her hands neatly in her lap. "I was thinking," she said, "of little Tommy Simons, a very naughty boy, quite incorrigible, but occasionally very funny. One of those angel-faced children who are always up to mischief." She glanced around, eyes twinkling. "Last week in Sunday school, he asked Miss Durson, is it correct to say yolk of egg is white or yolk of egg are white? And Miss Durson explained very patiently that one would say either yolks of eggs are white or yolk of egg is white. And naughty Tommy said very solemnly, well, I'd say yolk of egg is yellow." A few polite laughs rose. Raymond looked puzzled. "Funny, Aunt Jane, but surely there's nothing to do with Mr. Petherick's extremely interesting story." "Oh, but it has," Miss Marple said gently, turning her serene, knowing face toward him. Her needles clicked softly as she picked them up again. "It has everything to do with it." Miss Marple gave a prim, knowing smile, the sort that suggested she had seen to the entire puzzle from the very beginning. "It's a catch," she said serenely. "Just like little Tommy Simons and his egg. And Mr. Petherick's story is exactly the same kind of catch." "Oh, my dear old friend, so like a lawyer." She shook her head at him, half fond, half reproachful. Mr. Petherick's eyes twinkled. "I wonder," he said softly, "whether you really do know." Without a word, Miss Marple tore a slip from her knitting pattern, wrote several neat lines on it, folded it crisply and passed it across the table. Petherick unfolded it. He read the words. He looked up, first startled, then admiring. "My dear friend," he murmured, "is there anything you do not know?" "Oh, I knew that when I was a child," Miss Marple said modestly. "We used to play with it in the nursery." Sir Henry stared at them both. "I feel rather left out. Surely there's some clever legal sleight of hand in all this." "None whatsoever," said Mr. Petherick, smiling thinly. "It's a perfectly fair problem. You mustn't mind Miss Marple. She has her own peculiar way of looking at things." "We should be able to arrive at the truth," said Raymond irritably. "The facts are straightforward enough." He ticked them off on his fingers. 5 people handled that envelope. The Spraggs had opportunity, but no motive. That leaves the other 3. If we consider way conjurers perform tricks right under the audience's noses, it seems to me George Clode might have slipped the paper out and substituted another while he was carrying the overcoat to the far side of the room. "I still think it was a girl," Joyce declared. "Emma Gaunt probably dashed downstairs, warned her what was happening, and she switched the envelopes. Easily done." Sir Henry shook his head firmly. "No," he said, "I disagree with you both. Sleight of hand is all very well for stage magicians, but in real life, under the eye of a sharp fellow like Mr. Petherick? No. He leaned back thoughtfully. "But there's one angle none of you seem to consider: motive born from fear." His voice took on a reflective weight. "Professor Longman had just left. We know he said very little while he was here. But Mrs. Spragg might well have panicked. Suppose she believed the new will would disinherit her? Suppose she thought Mr. Petherick had been summoned to undo all her work? In that case," he tapped a finger on the table, "she might have prepared to substitute a blank paper. And when Mr. Petherick unexpectedly returned, she panicked, burned the real will before she had time to read it." "No," Joyce said decisively. "She'd never burn it without reading it. Not Eurydice, Spragg." "I admit it's weak," Sir Henry conceded. He turned to the little lawyer with a playful gleam. "I suppose you didn't assist Providence yourself?" The suggestion was light, almost teasing, but Mr. Petherick's reaction was icy. "Sir Henry," he said sharply, straightening. "A most improper insinuation." Sir Henry held up his hands. "A jest, my friend, nothing more. Perhaps Dr. Pender has theory?" The clergyman sighed gently. "I cannot say I have any very clear ideas." There was a moment's silence. Everyone turned instinctively toward Miss Marple. Her needles clicked. Her eyes shone. She already knew. She had known from the very beginning. Dr. Pender folded his hands thoughtfully. "I still believe," he said, "that the substitution was done by one of the Spraggs, perhaps clumsily and perhaps with good reason. Fear, panic, the sense that the real will might disinherit them." Joyce nodded eagerly. "I think Dr. Pender's version makes the most sense." "Mr. Petherick, is that the true answer?" The lawyer smiled, a small, dry, cryptic smile. "No," he said, "not even close. The truth, when it finally came to me, was something I should never have imagined." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "It happened about a month after Clode's death. I was dining with Philip Garrard. We had finished the port, and conversation drifted naturally toward legal curiosities. As we talked, he suddenly said, 'Petherick, I've come across an interesting case. Entirely confidential, of course.' 'Certainly,' I told him. 'A friend of mine,' he continued, 'had good reason to fear that an elderly relative intended to leave everything to an utterly unworthy outsider. My friend, let us say, possessed a certain resourcefulness.'" Mr. Petherick's voice tightened slightly. Philip went on, "In the household there was a maid, utterly devoted to my friend's side family. So my friend gave her a simple task. He handed her a fountain pen, identical in appearance to the one her master usually used, but filled with a special ink. She was told only this: place the pen in a different drawer, not the usual one. And if the old gentleman ever asked her to bring him his pen to witness a signature, she was to bring that one, the duplicate, without question. She did so, faithfully, without knowing its purpose. Petherick paused, letting the weight of that sink in. I stared at Garrard across the table. He looked right back at me. Pleasant as you please. The ink, he said lightly, was evanescent ink. A childish trick, really. Starred solution with a touch of iodine. Looks like ordinary dark blue ink, but the writing vanishes in 4 or 5 days. He lifted his brows, and at that moment he said, I knew the truth. I saw the whole thing. Miss Marple gave a delighted chuckle. Disappearing ink, she cried. Dear me, how many times we used that in the nursery. My cousins and I ruined half the household accounts one summer. She beamed, almost affectionate in her triumph. But it is a catch, Mr. Petherick, she said, wagging a finger. Just like a lawyer's trick. A very neat, clever little catch. You just heard Motive versus Opportunity, narrated by Rob and rewritten for Audible Archives by Raul. If you enjoyed this clever little puzzle of wills, witnesses, and disappearing ink, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, trust your instincts, watch the details, and keep listening.